Welcome to the Grateful Life webcast. I'm your host, Ashley Eicher. On today's show, we're talking about creativity, fuel for living with our guest, Joe McNally. Joe is a world-renowned photographer, director, and author with over 40 years of experience creating amazing images, who has traveled to 70 countries around the globe and counting. His work has graced multiple covers of Life magazine, National Geographic, Sports Illustrated, and many other publications. He has photographed celebrities, dignitaries, and politicians such as Tony Bennett, Michelle Pfeiffer, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, Cher, Dana Carvey, President Joe Biden, Steve Martin, and more. He also has an affinity for scaling tall buildings, including the Empire State Building, World Trade Center, and Burj Khalifa, in an effort to get a unique perspective. Joe, thank you so much for joining us today. It is great to see you.
Oh, thank you, Ashley. It's an honor to be here and to participate in this discussion.
Well, before we get started, for everyone watching at home, if you have something that you want to ask Joe, scroll down on this page and you'll see a place where you can submit your questions. We are going to get to as many of them as we can later on in the show. All right, now, Joe, you've been a creative for most of your life. Can you share with us a brief overview of your journey as a photographer?
Sure. Not a straight line at all. The creative
life it never is.
No. A creative life can be bumpy, but it has amazing rewards. I was always interested in stories, even as a kid. I read a lot. I went to 5 different grammar schools. And, always being the new kid, I kind of found my own diversions, and I read, epics and novels and adventures and all that stuff. And I know, way down the road, that infused a certain look to my photography. And I really embraced the idea of stories because they could transport you from, very mundane circumstances in your imagination, in your head, you could travel. And that was really, I think, the beginning of it, even though at that point, you don't know what, eventually is going to happen with your life. So as I traveled through all of that, eventually I came around to the idea, well, I could do stories for a living. And right. I went to school to be a journalist, a writer, but I was required to take a photography class. It was an absolute requirement. No ifs, ands, or buts. That was it, and all right, but as soon as I took a camera in hand, it felt completely natural. And I think I knew right then and there.
Well, you have this ability to tell these amazing stories in a single frame or even a series of frames through a photo essay. So where did you find the inspiration that made you want to create these images that you are so well known for?
Well, I appreciate that. That's a kind thing to say. Definitely they come from my imagination, which I kind of talked about, but also a sense of curiosity. There was an eagerness I had to participate in the world. I knew I wanted to get out with a camera and start documenting things. It was a prime motivation. I love people. I've been a people photographer my whole life. I'm always curious. How do people do things? What's their job like? How do things work? What's another country like? Different customs, different practices, be it cultural, religious, and the idea of crossing borders and getting into places I had never been before was really, really energizing.
Well, you grew up reading a lot of comic books too. So how did that influence your photography?
Yeah, I mean, maybe, you can't see everything behind me here in my studio, but I've got my comic book heroes up on the walls here and there for sure. Comic books are really great storytelling devices. They have color, they have punch, they have narrative. The panels move you along very graphically and powerfully. And so you can see that, I'm sure, in my work. You can see I have a strong color palette. There's oftentimes a hero point of view to the photograph. There is, as has been noted to me on several occasions, there's a certain strangeness to my imagination. You dive in, like, for instance, this picture here, my mother always told me, she said, you'll stay there and do your homework, young man. You'll stay there until the cows come home. Okay. All right, Mom. Well, I went to Romania and I found that the cows actually do come home. At the end of the day, there's kind of a bell that rings, the gate is open from the pasture, and the cows just walk home.
I love it.
No human assistance is needed. They know where their driveways are. They just walk up the driveway. And I thought, wow, Mom was right. And so I coerced, induced, cajoled this Romanian family into bringing a cow into their kitchen.
And it worked out. It became a great shot and a great photo that you now have.
Well, it was fun. It's satisfied an urge that I had on location. I wasn't assigned to do that. We'll get into this a little later on in the program, but I think, when you're curious, as many folks are, certainly photographer, you have to have that component in your personality. But nobody assigned me. Life magazine didn't call me up and say, Joe, we want you to photograph a cow in the kitchen. No, that comes from up in here,
Right.
And nobody can stop that. That's a beautiful thing about being a creative. Whether you're a painter, a writer, you've got to write, you've got to shoot, you've got to paint. If you're a musician, you've got to play.
Well, so those comic books and the things you were reading growing up, how did that impact your approach to storytelling?
Good question. There's a whole variety of approaches in the journalistic world. For instance, Life magazine didn't have the range of budget and time, oftentimes, that, say, National Geographic had. So at Life magazine, we oftentimes referred to as the one-picture photo essay, where you can make a portrait of someone, say, in their environment, and there's so many storytelling artifacts within the context of that one photograph that's really all you need. The photograph is very clear and it indicates the story of that person's life. Whereas National Geographic, you're out there on a long form narrative. You're looking for pieces and you're trying literally to hit the high, peaks of the topography of a story. You can't get to everything. And that's why the stories at National Geographic were oftentimes, classically, 30 or 40 pages, because they'd spin you around the globe, just finding things to come back and create a coherent storyline that actually moves and informs the reader.
I love that. So for someone who is looking to get started in photography or any other creative outlet, what would be a way that they could discover or at least start looking for a project or a story to tell from their everyday lives or something going on around them?
Well, this is going to sound really straightforward and almost totally simplistic, but you need to look around. I have a very good friend and colleague at the National Geographic. When he was asked, how do you make more interesting photographs? Jim would just look at folks and say, well, if you want to make better pictures, stand in front of more interesting stuff, which,
right. It seems so simple.
It's simple, but it's powerful.
Right.
So I think you have to put a spin on your world. I do tell people, look, you don't have to go to Romania. You don't have to go to Japan or Africa or any of these far-flung locations. Nothing wrong with doing that. But there are good stories just at your fingertips. The world that you encounter every day, the people you love who are near you, that's interesting stuff. If you just take it and maybe look at it slightly differently through a different prism. How can I, for instance, tell a story about the gentleman at the coffee shop that I walk by every morning, who I go in and say hi and I order my coffee? What's his life like? Does he own the shop, or does he work there? Does he live far or near? What does he do on the weekends? I mean, all those things, someone's work, someone's life, who you kind of can bypass in the routine of your day to day. Stop a minute, look at it differently, just embrace it and be curious about it.
Well, and that's what I would hope we're all doing in our everyday life, is being curious about other people and getting to know where they are and where they come from, and just learning more. Like, I think we have something to learn from everyone. So I love that you're relating that to theater photography.
Yes, a very famous photographer who is a good friend, Jay Maisel, oftentimes said that being a photographer is a license to steal experience. You don't become an expert on one particular subject, but you get to bounce off of many, many different topics during the course of your career as a storyteller. Let's just call it being a storyteller. So, and that could be one aspect. It could be, the folks next door or down the block, or the local industry, or the local high school soccer team. It could be any of those things, or it could be something that you have an overarching passion about.
Yeah.
I have a friend, George Devoki, who has spent 50 years studying a bird colony way north in the Arctic. And he's a perfect example of the kind of tenacity you have to bring to a project that you are really passionate about.
When I love, last week we were talking on the phone and you told me the story about Les Goodson. Would you share that with our audience?
Sure, sure. One of the great things about being a freelance photographer is that you don't have a job. You got no place to go. You're not rushing to the office. I mean, you work very, very hard. I don't mean to, be facetious all the way through here, but I've known Les now off and on for 6, 7, 8 years. He tends to play saxophone on Fifth Avenue at just about the same place all the time. And I've listened to him a couple of occasions. And, the beautiful thing about being being a photographer is that you create this picture archive of your life. And I realized I went back through a couple of my New York chapters, if you will, and there was Les. I had stopped and made a couple of pictures. And so I saw him again. And per form, I put a little money in his saxophone case and I moved on. And then I got to the next corner. I said, I got no place to go. He's really playing well. So I went back and I sat down on the sidewalk next to him and I listened to him for a while and we bantered until he said, I got to play here. You're blocking my business. I said, all right. I get it. But I came back to him and I ended up doing a story about him for the Atlantic magazine. And it's amazing because he, you don't think about this. You see somebody playing on the street and you can bypass them and say, oh, perhaps you say, oh, that poor man, or something like that. He went to Juilliard. He chooses to play on the street. And he goes back to his home up in Harlem and he makes a log of his daily earnings. And I'm not going to tell you how much he makes in the holidays. It's substantial, because Fifth Avenue is a very busy holiday street. And also, too, his spot is over a grate. He parks himself next to this high-end New York club that's got a pool in the basement. And the pool, the hot air from the pool vents through the grate. So even on the coldest day in January, he's got hot air, blowing up his skirt. And he's there and he's warm and he's happy and he's playing. I mean, these are things that lots of folks don't think about.
Right.
It's bypassed. So when you trip that wire in your head and you become essentially curious about another human being, that's when magic can really start to happen.
I was going to say, you took the words right out of my mouth. I'm like, you never know what can happen or what you can learn or the relationships that can be built. If someone is struggling to find a story that really interests them, what's another way that they can get started?
Good question. There's, you can answer this in very broad terms, but, more specifically for me, my own personal experience is I try to embrace the world. I read a lot. I try to figure out what's going on out there. And it's a process of discovery. It's a series of surprises sometimes. My friend Steve is a writer. Many years ago, I picked up a story in the New York Times about an Italian family in Brooklyn that was keeping the age-old Sicilian tradition of the opera di pupi, the puppet theater of Sicily. And I called up Steve. I said, why don't we do a story on that family out in Brooklyn? He said, why don't we go to Sicily and do a story about the origins of the theater? And next thing you know, we're for Geo magazine. And I shot a cover of Geo magazine on the Sicilian puppet theater. Okay. All right. I never would have known about that.
Right.
But get curious about art forms, people who do things, people who are creative in and of themselves, and you're drawn to that. The other thing I do have, and my wife is very patient with this, I literally have hundreds of photography books. And when I need to feel clean again about being a photographer, when I need to feel some measure of inspiration, I might be stuck in a rut, I'll go back to those books and I'll remind myself of how passionate those photographers were and how they created imagery that tripped my heart a long time ago and basically insisted that I become a photographer.
So I think a lot about, my friends that are creative freelancers, and they talk about needing self-assignments, basically to stay sharp, because like you're saying, there could be some time between one job to the next. You never quite know what's coming in, what's going to come to you next from a different media outlet. So do you have to give yourself creative assignments just to stay sharp, or how does that impact you?
Absolutely. That's a good question, really. Being an artist is like being an athlete.
Yeah.
If you don't practice, if you don't work those muscles, they're going to get stiff and eventually just disappear. So self-assigning is a great way to just stir the pot in your head. I have friends who have gone out they say for the next 24 hours, I'm going to photograph the color red. And they literally put themselves in a box. Everybody always talks about, oh, think outside the box, think about, the wide world. Well, sometimes it's advantageous to put yourself in a box and try to think creatively within that space. I always say that about studio photography. What's a studio when you walk in? It's an empty room that you fill with your imagination. It's really just 4 white walls, generally speaking. Mm-hmm. So self-assigning is a very, very powerful thing. I've always said and believed, I tell young photographers this, I say, look, the eye is a hunter. The eye seeks pleasure. You have to feed your eye. I'd rather have a new photograph than a new lens.
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking about, how do you see an image? Like, what do you see when you look at an image?
Yeah, again, things I've said over the years, I almost feel a photograph before I see it. There's an instinct you develop as an artist, whether it be a painter or, sometimes, a writer will say, look, I felt the muse sit on my shoulder. And there was a very famous photographer years ago, shot for Magnum, did amazing corporate photography. Like, he was always tackling like big projects, for massive corporations, General Electric and all this sort of stuff. And he would do this amazingly beautiful graphic stuff. He would turn some of this mundane machinery into graphically beautiful elements. And someone asked him, sir, how do you do that? And he said, well, sometimes I just sit there and wait for the machine to talk to me. And that sounds like some sort of mystical, kind of mumbo jumbo, but it's not really. It's not. If you pause long enough to reflect, if you start to develop a backlog of imagery that has propelled you through your life or remains important to you, when you go out into the world, there's going to be a chord that strikes when you see that scene that you just know will become a good photograph. And it's approachable. And my editor at the Geographic always told me, he said, there's a point in time where a photographer who's on assignment, say for months for the National Geographic, steps forward and all of a sudden realizes they're in control of the story. Because when you get a big story, for instance, as a journalist for a magazine where there's a lot of pressure like the National Geographic, it's like being thrown into the deep end of the pool. For the first, maybe third or half of the story, you're foundering. You feel like you're drowning, which is something maybe I should tell people too, or we should mention, the idea of a creative life. Failure is a component. You have to struggle sometimes. And an oft overlooked component of a creative life is sheer, utter mule-headedness.
Stubborn. Stubborn.
You got to be stubborn. Yeah. You've got to hang in there and say, no, this is important, and I'm going to do it. So there's an essential need that you have. It's like an itch you can't scratch until you go and make that photograph.
Well, how does that stubbornness or even that fear of failure, how does that propel you forward, Joe?
Oh, fear's a biggie. Another good question, Ashley. Fear's a big one. Look at, those, folks in Hollywood who spend $120 million on a movie and nobody goes sees it.
Right.
Oh my goodness. So there's a tightrope approach to the creative life. And I'm not saying that, if you fall off, horrible things are going to happen. No, but maybe the best way to put it is you have to venture. You have to go forward and say, all right, I'm going to give this a try without having any assurances that it's going to work. And, the things that you can liken it to is like stepping on a boat, having no idea where that boat's going. Because that's also an element of the creative life, is you have to surrender to it. You really do. You have to just say, okay, this is what I need to do, so I'm going to give myself over to it. If you approach somebody and say, oh, I'm really curious about you. I'm passionate about telling the story of you and your life. And then the next thing you say to them is, okay, but here's the thing. I've got some business appointments in the morning, and then I have an errand to run in the afternoon. So I can maybe come by around 3 o'clock tomorrow.
Right.
No, no. Once you say, I want to do this story, I'd like you to let me into your life, that's a huge ask. And you have to honor that with a total commitment.
Yes. Well, it's a very vulnerable place for people to be in. Like, I think about that with so many of the artists and A-list celebrities I've interviewed over the years. Like, when you get that opportunity to be in someone's home or walk with them for a day through their everyday life, that is a very sacred space to get to be a part of. And you do have to honor that.
You do. And there's a partnership that's created there.
Yes.
Whether you're a portrait painter or maybe you're doing a short story about someone's life in a written form, or being a photographer, when that person gets in front of your lens, and your lens could be, your pen and paper, you're looking at this, you're regarding it, that's a tremendous gift that subject has given to you. And so what you have to do is honor that, in my case, at the camera. And I kind of say, look, all right, it's even unspoken. You say to yourself, I'm going to do my best by you.
Yes.
Right. And also, in the aftermath, I'm going to be the good shepherd of your pictures. So there's a trust there that someone gives to you, and you have to give it back.
Absolutely. So for someone who may not see themselves as creative, what advice or encouragement would you give to them, or would you share? I know you have this really great story about the cop.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a friend. He came to one of my workshops, and he's a police officer, and he's just a decent human being, but he's a cop. He's been through some stuff, and photography was his outlet. And so during the course of the week, he had a very bad day. His pictures were god awful, and it wasn't a good moment, critiquing them or looking at them afterwards. And he wrote me a letter. He said, I'm not coming, an email. He said, I'm not coming to class tomorrow. He goes, I just have to accept it. I'm just not a creative guy. And I wrote him back that night. I said, you're a cop. And that to me is one of the most creative things anyone could do. I mean, look at what you have to do. You have to walk into sometimes a situation that's fraught, that's dangerous, that's emotional, that's high pitched, and you have to calm the thing down. Right. You have to find solutions. You have to be creative in separating the antagonists, if you will. You have to seek a solution that's amenable to the parties at hand, and defuse the situation. And when you are called upon to do that, you're called upon to do it like that. You don't have to go, you don't have the time or the luxury to go and say, I wonder what could be a good approach here. No, you got to do that and think on your feet, be fast on your feet. And a lot of that is you can incorporate into the creative life. You can incorporate into being a photographer.
Well, I personally think we are all creative beings in some way, shape, or form, whether we realize it or not. So for someone who is questioning their creativity or wondering, is it too late for me to be creative in my life? What are some practical ways people can tap into their unique creative abilities?
Sure. Your creativity, there always is. I mean, in our lives, as we age, as we go forward, there's always kind of a youth movement coming along, behind us or something. And then there's a lot of energy and attention being paid to that particular youthful aspect of our culture, which is fantastic. But it doesn't mean that because you are no longer considered perhaps youthful, that creativity has to shut down. In fact, it can ramp up, because maybe as you age, maybe you achieve that nirvana of having the time to go and pursue something you might have wanted to pursue your whole life. I teach workshops all over the world. And I would say, 60, 70% of the folks who come to my workshops have done other things in their life and been very, very successful. And then that aspect of their life might be over. They might be, secure, or just all of a sudden have the time, and they return to a first love, photography. Right. And they're trying to switch on another area of their brain. And what happens is all that experience, I look around sometimes at the groups that I'm in, and I'm like, I almost get embarrassed sometimes, Ashley. I'm like, geez, there's successful people all here, waiting to hear about photography. And I'm talking f-stops and shutter speeds, which seems simple by comparison to what a lot of folks out there have done to get to that point in their lives. But the thing about it is they are seeking a difference. They are seeking somehow in some way to change direction and open up a new vista in their head and their heart. And my job is to try to help them do that. One of the ways that someone can energize their creativity, I think, and it's very powerful, there's camera clubs. Let's stick in the realm of photography for a second. There's camera clubs all over the country. Join a camera club, okay? We all need feedback. Digital photography is a wonderful thing, but it also is kind of isolating, because it's you and the computer, right? And you put your images out on Instagram or something like that, and people say, oh, nice picture. Oh, nice picture. Well, that's not considered criticism. That's not evaluative, really. They're just patting you on the back. They don't even know you. But if you join a camera club, and sometimes the camera club itself can institute self-assignments. I know many, many camera clubs that, reach out to their members and say, okay, by next Friday, we want you to photograph an image that speaks to love, and then you have to think your way into that. And it forces you to think creatively because, again, and this is full circle now, Ashley, we're coming back to fear, because when you bring those images in next week, you're going to be compared to the rest of the camera club, and you want to do well.
Right.
So it gives you a kick in the butt to get out there with a camera and really, really go after it, because there's a community all of a sudden that you're a part of. You're not just one person looking at your screen. And you always have this support. The camera club idea is a good one. Not that your spouse or your loved ones around you are not wonderful people, but they're more likely to give you a free pass. Oh, that's really nice, honey.
Right.
That's a beautiful photograph. I love that sunset. That, in their head, they're thinking that I've seen 40 million of. Hello, but they're going to give you, reassurance. Let's put it that way. But a camera club and a measure of competitive kind of camaraderie, I think that can give you a push to ignite some of your creative juices.
What I was going to say, as you were talking, when you are hosting these workshops that you do, how do you help people ignite that inner creativity, especially if they feel like they've lost it? Or how do you encourage them to remain creative as they age?
Yeah, that's I don't know whether it's a two-edged sword, right? Critique is powerful. People don't like to be told, or people don't like criticism inherently. Like, we all want, a measure of praise, but considered, genteel's the wrong word, but here's the thing. If I'm viewing someone's photograph and it's awful, I'll find something positive. You have to throw people a lifeline. You have to let them grab something that they will continue to pull themselves along the creative path with. And so there's a measure of encouragement, there's a measure of critique, and then there's also a measure of sheer that we offer in workshops, obviously, is technical advice. A lot of folks look at the buttons and dials of a camera and they just give up.
Right.
And they say, oh, I can't do this. This is crazy. Look at all these numbers I'm dealing with. You have to simplify that. You have to demystify it, and you have to make them unafraid of taking the camera in their hands and making mistakes. One of the big things I encourage people who come to my workshops is to get out of their box. I always tell them, I would rather see a magnificent failure than a by rote success. I don't want you to go out there and do what you've been doing. I want you to look differently. And
right.
Again, I'll reference Jay Maisel, who's a genius photographer and straight talker, super smart. He'll look at you and say, move your butt, out there in the field. To let that creativity wrap around you, you have to be nimble mentally and you have to be nimble physically. If you're photographing one way, well, okay, go 180 degrees from that position and look at it differently.
Right.
Okay. If you're using a wide angle lens, use a telephoto. Try different things. Be unafraid of mistakes. Give yourself over to the process and allow yourself to, I don't know, get beaten up a little bit along the way, because your path to better photographs is littered with failures, littered with bad pictures. And if you're not making bad pictures, you're never going to ultimately make good ones.
Well, you have to learn from the bad photos as well. Like, was there someone in your career that was that encouragement for you, someone that gave you the feedback that helped you focus on a specific area of photography or helped you to keep going?
Oh, yes. There's nothing like an angry New York City wire service editor on deadline to express a unique brand of their disappointment in you. You know, my legendary editor, Larry DeSantis, he would oftentimes critique me in the most direct way possible. He would offer me, picture advice and sort of analyze my ancestry for me and tell me to get the hell out of the office. There's that end.
It was some tough love.
Yeah, tough love, exactly. But also, mentors are very powerful. You need a mentor. You need an editor, not only in your creative life, your life in general, right? So I was very fortunate that I bumped into a gentleman who was a legendary life photographer when he was actively shooting, but also then became the director of photography of life. And his name is John Loengard, and he's no longer with us. And there's a portrait I made of John. And you can see maybe, if you're familiar with cameras at all, that's a little bit of a different eyepiece. John used a look down eyepiece. He wouldn't put his eye into the camera with the camera in front of his face. He always wanted to maintain a certain level of visual connection with his subject. So he used a prism that he'd have to look down like this, and almost like an old style camera, so he could keep his eye on his subject. And John was very powerful editor and a very powerful mentor and critiquer. And he gave me an initial long ago, I went to him, I had a selection of photographs, and he gave me a very powerful assessment. He said, this journalism that you're doing here, it was good, it's reasonable. But this other aspect of what you're showing me, all of this here where you're lighting things and constructing things, there's real energy there.
Yeah.
And that was a very powerful thing for him to say. Actually, there's the creative life has lots of twists and turns. We've already talked about that.
Right.
And there's no real, there's no one who can give you an absolute, North Star,
right.
An absolute path. Someone can put up guideposts for you. And that was what John did for me right at that point. He was just like, he would just stuck it in the ground. And it was like, turn here, and you can ignore that advice, or you can say, that's pretty powerful counsel. I should try it. So the uncertain path, when you meet a good mentor, the uncertain path becomes a little more certain.
Well, and you've said that you have to show your audience in a photo. What exactly does that mean?
I have to show my audience in a photo?
Yes.
Talk to me more about that.
Well, I think you're trying to just like creating the story. You have to show the audience. You're trying to connect with the audience in the photo in that way.
Yes.
Like, what do you mean by that? That's the way I interpret it.
Yep, absolutely.
Tell me if I'm wrong, Joe. It's fine.
Okay, well, this is your first misstep, Ashley, so I'm going to let it.
Fired. I'm fired.
No, human beings like pictures of other human beings. That's not to say that there isn't beautiful wildlife photography and landscape photography, but there's a special connection when someone can relate to your photograph in a very human way. If I got a picture published in National Geographic, it would have to fire on at least 3 pistons. It would have to be pictorially successful. In other words, a good photograph. It would have to be informationally successful. It would have to move the story on down the road. And then the most powerful one, it would have to be emotionally powerful.
Right.
Again, I'm referring to legendary editors like who sent me to places like this, the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln in the Gulf War. Editors will tell you that the emotionality of a picture, is preempts everything. Eddie Adams was a very famous photojournalist who was a friend of mine. And he made the famous Pulitzer Prize winning photograph in Vietnam of the South Vietnamese colonel blowing the brains out of the suspected Viet Cong. And very dark photograph, very powerful. And he always said, a good photograph is one that reaches into your rib cage and rips your heart out. Now, that's fairly violent imagery.
Yeah.
Thankfully, that doesn't actualize, but I always have been a big believer in the fact that when you see a really powerful photograph, you are emotionally changed forever. You might not even be aware of it at the moment that you're viewing it, but somewhere inside, your emotional tectonic plates have shifted just slightly, and you will never be the same. And I hark back to my memory as a child. My dad had a pictorial history of World War II. It was one of those big older style books from the 60s. Wasn't a good, well-designed book or anything, but it had enormously powerful pictures, all black and white, from World War II. And I remember going over that book as a youngster, and I mean real youngster, 7, 8. And I think back on that now, not only do I remember the photographs, I can remember the layouts.
Wow.
I can remember the pictures as they were arranged on a page. And I didn't know it back then, but even back then, I was becoming a photographer. So it's very powerful stuff that you're messing around with when you're talking about really good, emotionally laden photographs.
What are some of the really meaningful photos or projects that stand out to you that you've gotten to be a part of in your career? I know you have some incredible ones.
Well, I'm grateful and blessed that I've been sent to photograph fascinating, sometimes emotionally distressful, situations. Always think about this. The wonderful thing about being a storyteller, and again, I refer to all manner of storytelling and the creative life in general, is you are oftentimes sent to witness genius. Because you are sent to photograph somebody who is extraordinary at what they do. They're a dancer on stage, they're a musician, they're a writer, they're a teacher, they're a doctor, they're whatever, but you are sent to photograph them because somehow, in some way, they are truly special. They have elevated their game to the point of people should know about them, and it's worthwhile going after them and trying to tell a story. So one of the powerful things that Life magazine offered me at one point was to go find the subjects of Pulitzer Prize winning photograph many years after the fact of the Pulitzer. Now, when you're the subject of a Pulitzer photograph, it's generally speaking not a good day, and you will know this photograph immediately. Young girl, horribly burned with napalm, running down the road in Vietnam. Comes up in your mind, right? You know this picture, right? Kim Phuc. And Nick Utt made that photograph. He was working for the Associated Press, and he also saved her life. Made the picture, got her onto an Army helicopter, got her to a hospital, and her life became this odyssey, all driven by that one split second in time. And I was sent to photograph her, and I met her, and she's a lovely lady. She crusades for peace and understanding. And I'm a big believer, you have to do this. I'm very direct with my subjects. I'm honest with them. I walked in, we met, talked, and I said, Kim, I need to make pictures of you. And to do that effectively, I need to see your scars. And she understood, she knew. And Thomas, the baby that she has in her hands, just born, who's still nursing, and this beautiful little cherub of a baby gave us the perfect avenue to show those scars in a wonderful way, if you will. Yeah. From her terribly scarred body sprang this beautiful new life. And that was, I remember, you make a picture like that, you kind of stop breathing for a while,
Right.
And then pictures, become bridges for people, emotional storytelling bridges. In the aftermath of 9/11, I did a project called The Faces at Ground Zero. And right. I used the world's only giant Polaroid camera. And the photograph you see there, the camera makes the picture that size.
Wow.
It's about 4 feet by 9 feet, those frames. And the Polaroids, if you're 6 feet in real life, you're 6 feet in the Polaroid. And it's Polaroid technology. So this giant photograph gets rolled off you make the exposure, it gets rolled onto the floor, and the chemical peel, the backing, is taken off. 90 seconds later, an alarm goes off, and there's the fully developed positive image with the very distinctive Polaroid color palette. And I felt that this old camera, that's a mixed term really, because it's old style of certain photographic elements, but technology that was pretty advanced, Polaroid technology. So it's this odd amalgam of old school photography and new technology. But I felt that there was a rectitude, a dignity that this camera could impart to the people who came in front of it. And I felt that the folks who were first responders in the aftermath of 9/11 really deserved that kind of an approach.
Yes.
So my tiny little studio.
We're looking at some of those images right now.
Sure. The one you're looking at now was Jason Cascone, and he was a probationary firefighter. His very first day of work was 9/11. He was given last rites and put on a bus and sent to the pit. This is what people went through in those immediate aftermath days. And he ultimately became, I think, the youngest captain or battalion chief even in FDNY. Joe Hodges, is retired now. The people who came in front of the camera were just extraordinary. People congratulating me, said, "Oh, they're amazing pictures." I said, "No, they're amazing people."
Yes.
Okay. And that's the gift they gave to me by standing in front of the camera and allowing me to make this image, which was not an easy image to make because of the technical difficulties the camera presented. There's two people physically inside the camera. The camera is the size of a one-car garage. If this is a little bit of photo lingo, but at F45, there's a half an inch of depth of field. Father Jordan, he became the chaplain of FDNY, and he, when I was photographing him, I met him a couple times. We had to get on the subway together. I didn't have a subway pass, and Father Jordan cursed me up, down, and sideways. I'm like, "Father Jordan, he's, I got to use my own pass to get you on the subway." I'm like, "Take it easy, Father. I'll say a couple Hail Marys." But they were an extraordinary group of people. And in the aftermath of 9/11, that camera and that project gave them an opportunity to tell their story. And that's what people were seeking after 9/11, because the world turned upside down. People were foundering, people were wondering. They didn't really know how to react, but they wanted their story told.
Well, I think these images are so powerful, especially when we think about, we just honored 9/11, just a week ago. So just getting to see these images again for me is just, it's really powerful. So I'm so grateful you're sharing these with our audience today.
Well, thanks. No, it's as I say, it's just amazing people. A lot of whom are still my friends.
Well, you've talked about the relationship between the photographer and the subject. So I'm curious, how much do you think about that going into a project? What is going on in your mind before you meet someone who is going to be in front of your camera?
Yeah. Well, again, there's a a certain, I wouldn't say it's fear, but there's a nervous element, like, I hope this is going to go well, and sometimes the bigger the presence, maybe more celebrity oriented, maybe your worry is kind of a little bit elevated because again, how much time will I get? Will they be amenable to my ideas, et cetera? When I'm photographing just plain folks, and being sent out, say, just to photograph, for Life magazine, we oftentimes did stories on the heartland and people who aren't generally used to being in front of a camera. Well, I'm from New York, that was my photographic home. So one of my first things I would try to do is try to convince these folks that I'm not some, jerk from New York City who's going to be aggressive and push them around and, order a cappuccino,
Nothing wrong with a cappuccino, Joe.
Nothing wrong with
Nothing
cappuccino.
wrong with it.
No, I was with brings me back to a story I was doing for Life magazine. I was with a reporter, writer who was very New York, and we were eating in a place called the Jailhouse Cafe in Ely, Nevada, very country place. And she said, at the end of dinner, she said, "May I have a cappuccino?" And a classic kind of coffee house waitress just looked at her and said, "Darling, we got coffee."
We got regular and decaf. That's it.
You know, that's it. You know, so yeah. So that's, you know, when you go out in the world with a camera, you know, one of the things you have to remember, and because I've done this at a somewhat elevated, in a somewhat elevated way, I've always tried to remember when I leave town, when I, you know, leave this family or go away and the story, you know, going to get published, etc., they're going to talk about me forever.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, remember that time that guy from National Geographic came through? You know, and you want the next words out of their mouth to be, "That was pretty cool." You don't want the next words to be like, "He was really a jerk."
Well, there are some images too that I know that you have that resurface later on down the road, and sometimes many years down the road. Will you tell this particular story?
Sure. Which images are we going to talk about?
Well, photographing President Biden.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, we can talk about that. I was assigned by People magazine to document Joe Biden after he was coming back to resume his Senate duties after being sidelined with a very serious health issue, an aneurysm type of condition. And it was perilous for him, but he made it through, regained his health, and then came back to the Senate. And I met him at the Wilmington train station because that was Joe Biden. You know,
Right.
He has been known throughout his career and has embraced the nickname Amtrak Joe. He's been a fan of railroads his whole career. And this photograph, I know, is one of his favorites. He has it, I believe, in the Oval Office. And when they launched the infrastructure bill during his presidency, he had a video made of him that they put out on the White House Instagram page. And he is at the Resolute desk and he's holding that photograph. So I've always been it's proud that I'm proud that he likes it, but I'm also, you know, kind of proud of the fact that every once in a while, not always, every once in a while, you make certain photographs that will stand the test of time.
Right. Because how long ago did you take that photo?
1987.
Wow.
Yep. And, you know, those are the best photographs in many ways. I mean, I just related you the story of Kim Phuc.
Right.
And you, of course, knew the image when I described it, right? The, you know, running down the road and horribly burned, you know that image right away. Still images have a unique ability. And I'm not denigrating video or anything like that. That's an absolutely creative art form. But for me, still images form the matrix of my memory. When I think of great times, bad times, if I think of people, celebrities, famous people doing crazy stuff, whatever it is, oftentimes what my brain finds, you know, somehow in this Rolodex up here is the still image that is associated with that time, place, or person.
So before we get too much further, I want to remind our audience, if you have questions for Joe, make sure to add those into the chat. We will try and ask him as many questions as we can here in the next couple minutes. But Joe, before we get to that, like, how do you help someone feed their creativity, especially if they are looking at a different art form like photography or another medium? How do you help feed that creativity?
Sure. If I could just say about the questions, Ashley, you know, if anybody can't get the question in, it's Ashley's fault. She's got too chatty.
It's me. I know. It's all my fault, Joe.
You know, I'm trying to get a word in here edgewise, Ashley. Yeah.
It takes one to know one, Joe. Okay? Yeah. It takes one to know one.
All right. So feeding your creativity. Creativity comes in all sorts of forms and packages, to be sure. I have a little bit of an outlandish sense of creativity. My imagination is sparked by color and light and fantastical stuff. And I've always believed in the power of juxtaposition. I photographed dance, for instance, my whole life, photographic life. And I oftentimes have found myself putting dancers in illogical or strange positions. A dancer at the edge of a canyon. What's a ballet dancer doing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, as a for instance? Not that I've done that, but things like that, juxtaposition of elements that can create a certain vibrancy to the scene that you are pursuing. And so I think, that gets back to, there you go, what is pictorially successful about an older lady ignoring this young dancer in her kitchen in Havana, Cuba? Why is a ballerina on top of a Chevy? Because here's the thing, the Chevy, the old car, is emblematic of Cuban culture. And Cuban dance scene, Cuban dancers are very powerful and very beautiful. So you marry those two elements. And that is a way that you can perhaps ignite something in your own head about, like, well, what if I did this? And it can hark back, Ashley, to earlier in our conversation when, we were talking about looking at your everyday world slightly differently, just kind of kick your head off to the side and look at it with a different perspective. Or here's a very powerful thing that can feed your creativity. And it's just two words. I say them all the time. What if? What if I took that ballerina and put her on a Chevy? Can I make that happen? I went down to Cuba with that idea in mind. It was by no means a certainty, and they say, hey, hey guy, can, I rent your Chevy and put this ballerina on it? People actually wrote me letters saying, what are you doing to that poor car? I'm like, dude, it's a 57 Chevy. It's steel, relax, And by the way, the ballerina picture, the illogical nature of that kitchen scene has struck a chord.
Right.
My very dear friend, Amy Vitale, National Geographic photographer, launched a print sale immediately after the Ukrainian war started, and money to go to medical relief for Ukraine. And she started this. She asked all of us, basically National Geographic photographers of every era. And that was the print I submitted for sale. No money came back to me. It was all donated to medical relief. And that picture pulled in about $85,000.
Wow. That's amazing.
And it struck a chord because, here's the thing, Lowengarde, again, referring to John, and we've mentioned this, we talked about it, in our original conversation. Being peculiar is an advantage if you're a photographer or an artist or a painter or a writer. Being peculiar, being odd, making someone stop. Here's the thing, Ashley, we live in this oversaturated visual world. We're bombarded with imagery, Facebook,
Absolutely.
Everything going on out there. So what are you hoping for as a visual communicator, as a creative? You're hoping to get somebody to stop, even for a few seconds. Because when we're scrolling, right, we're just scrolling. Oh, yeah. Boom. You want somebody to say, hey, wait a minute. I liken it, we've got two cats here. And, when their bowls aren't full of food, they kind of look at you like, this, and they tilt their head like, hey, and that's what you want people to do. You want them to just say, hey, you want them to do this. You want them to get curious. You want them to become involved. Okay. For National Geographic, my job was, to make good pictures. And there's a lot of, ego about that, how you make these pictures. Oh, these pictures are so good. But at the end of the day, what is your job? Your job is to involve the reader, to suck the reader into the story and make them care.
Right.
Because that's very powerful stuff. If you can take someone who's not inclined to be interested and all of a sudden make them interested with your photograph, that is a powerful creative surge. And it doesn't matter if it's not the National Geographic. It could be the local, Gazette. One of the things that you can do as a photographer locally, establish a theme in your head and your heart. Revisit something every day. I had a friend of mine who brought I think he actually draped a tarp over his tripod and left it there, locked it down, concrete blocks and stuff like that, and returned to it about 40 or 50 times during the course of 4 seasons. And then he blended it together in this beautiful scene that reflects all four seasons, right?
Right.
And, that kind of creative tenacity is really, really essential to someone remaining creative even as they age.
Well, one of the things that we're going to wrap here in just a second, we only have a couple more minutes, but we were just rolling these really powerful images that you have taken. And we were talking about earlier on the phone, you really have to get comfortable in the uncomfortable. Will you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yes. Being an artist is not a comfort zone. Your best work will not come when you're feeling like, well tended. You have to stay out in the rain and continue to photograph when the coffee shop across the street looks very inviting. Let's put it that way. And when I went out and I visited distressed areas of the world in the aftermath of certain measures of conflict, you just have to give yourself over to that. Because when I got into Mogadishu, for instance, the Red Cross plane that dropped me off on a desert airstrip north of Moog just dropped me off and then took off. And I sat there on my equipment in the desert all by myself, and I watched that plane, it's a little Cessna, just get smaller and smaller in the vast blue of Africa. I thought, well, okay, this is just going to have to work out, And so you have to be comfortable with a great degree of uncertainty.
Right.
I've had a couple of staff positions over the course of time in my career as a photographer. They were short-lived. For most of the last 40 years, I haven't known where my next paycheck's coming from.
Yeah.
So the creative life is difficult and bumpy and all that sort of stuff. It's also glorious, because at the end of the day, when you go out with a camera in your hand or you sit down with your notebook, what you're doing is creating something that didn't exist in the morning. Like, right. I have this imagination and I'm going to go do this shot. And if the shot at the end of the day comes close to what I had imagined, then I took a piece of my fantastical imagination and made it real by photographing it. And that feels good. That's like a end of the day glass of red wine.
There you go. And with that red wine too. What would you say to someone who has never really accessed their creativity or pushed their creativity or felt like they had done something big in their life? What would you say to them right now?
Well, it's never too late, to start. Throw a dart at the wall. A lot of folks say, well, how do you start? Throw a dart at the wall and start. Okay, get off the couch. Don't sit there and watch more reruns of Blue Bloods. Get off the couch. Okay.
Sounds like my dad. He loves that show.
Well, it's a pretty good show. But, I think, again, there's a lot of, kind of circling back we've done here because creativity chases certain things in your head and your heart. And there's ways to mechanize that or initiate it. And one of the things is to partner with other creatives.
Yeah.
Ask advice, show a portfolio. There's all sorts of, conventions. They're all over the country. Some are online. Some you don't have to travel to. Others you have to go to. And you can reserve slots with picture editors from all over. And when I say all over the country, but all over in terms of genre. They can be magazine editors. They can be art directors at ad agencies. They can be corporate style people, whatever. And you can say, okay, here's that, genre that I'm interested in. I'm going to go show this person my work.
Yeah.
So that feedback can be literally, the kick that you need to get off that couch.
Right. We have a couple questions from our audience. What is a good starter camera? Is there a good starter camera that you would recommend?
Yes, well, let me say this. The digital cameras that we have across the board today are engineering marvels, right? Even the lower end, if you will, the starter cameras have technology that's just ridiculously off the charts. Cameras that focus for you, that judge your exposure, that give you the proper white balance or skin tones that you need. So I'm a Nikon shooter, so I'm familiar with that system. I'm not as familiar with Canon or Sony, right? Though the big three, if you want to call them, you could throw Fuji in there. They all make good stuff.
Yeah.
But for me, a great camera that is small and has enormous capability would be something along the lines of a Nikon ZF. It's proven to be a very popular camera. Not a lot of weight to carry, very, very, kind of easy going out there in the street. It comes with, there's kit lenses. I won't go into the specifics of them because I don't want to steer anybody wrong. But if you remember ZF, as in Frank, that to me would be an absolutely amazing starter camera for just about anybody.
Well, and for anybody that's like, I'm not ready to buy a camera yet, what are some tips that you have for taking photos on your phone?
Don't do it. No, I'm kidding.
Joe, that's not the answer.
Well, I've had that question from folks who are like, I want to shoot my cousin's wedding and on an iPhone. And my first advice is don't do it on an iPhone.
Right.
Because you really want the photographs to be, better. I mean, more durable. Let's put it that way. Right. Though iPhone and smartphone technology is, gaining technology like crazy. And you can, learn how to use it first, because what will happen is there's all sorts of modes, right? There's portrait mode, there's landscape mode, there's this and that, there's all sorts of editing capabilities. So, I would go, say, an iPhone. I would go to the Apple store and take a few classes in how to run it.
Right.
Before you took on, an assignment or a wedding or a friend's portrait or anything like that.
It's great. Always to have a class or a workshop. It's good to keep learning. Good to keep learning.
Absolutely. You have to. Absolutely have to. Because the technology is so fast now. Yeah. It's just so fast. I don't know. Well, I know a few people who are like techno geniuses and they keep up with it. I don't know how they do it.
Yeah, it shifts so quickly. I mean, we have covered so much today, from finding inspiration to building community to storytelling to the lasting impact of our creative work and so much more. We hope that you enjoyed our discussion on creativity with Joe and that it's inspired you to pick up that camera, paintbrush, pencil, carving knife, or whatever it is you choose to pick up, and that you get started creating something new today. Joe, thank you so much for such a great discussion today. It's just so fun to chat with you.
Thank you. Big thank you back to you. You were wonderful and prompting me and great questions. And it was really wonderful talking with you.
Oh, Joe, thank you so much. You can learn more about Joe on his Instagram at Joe McNally Photo or his website, joemcnallyphoto.com. And for people watching at home, this webcast will be available to watch again at any time on the Brookdale YouTube channel. Please share it with your friends, family, caregivers, or anyone else you think would find it helpful. Join us again on November 21st for our next webcast, Your Blueprint for Estate Planning. It's going to be an incredibly valuable discussion, and you can register for this event at brookdale.com/webcast. Thank you for joining us on Grateful Life. We will see you soon.